Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm Grace Pugh Hubbard, Climate Care Coordinator for the New England Annual Conference. And we're so glad to have you here today as we're joining in this February Creation Care Cafe virtually. So grab your cup of tea, your lunch, whatever you need, and drop your name in the chat and where you're from, maybe what church you're affiliated or whose land you set on, whose ancestral land are you taking charge of right now. So as we do that together, I'm going to be mindful of our time and going to ask Pastor Michael Leonard to open us in prayer. Michael?
Please be in the spirit of prayer. Creator God, we gather across screens and spaces, yet we trust that your spirit connects us as one community. You are the source of all imagination, beauty, and life. As we enter this Creation Cafe, awaken our curiosity, inspire our creativity, and open our hearts to wonder. Bless our conversation, our ideas, and our shared reflections. May this time deepen our care for the earth, for one another, and for the work you have placed in our hands. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for the inspiring words as we gather together. And I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Benjamin Durfee. And if he doesn't go through a tunnel on his Amtrak, he's going to introduce our two very special guests here today. Ben?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all, and thank you for joining. I hope that you can hear me. I am on an Amtrak train, but I am so glad that technology allows me to still be with you for this special event, which is kind of like a colliding of my worlds, which is kind of cool. So I have known Reverend Anna Woofenden for many years now. We used to work together where she's currently the rector at St. John's Episcopal Church in Northampton. And currently I am part of the Eco Preacher cohort where I'm getting to know Derek Weston on a monthly basis there as well. And coincidentally, those two people have wrote a book together. So it's kind of a cool thing. And so I wanted to invite them to come and share about their book with you today. I can't see the chat, but I think that Grace is dropping in their bios so you can read a little bit more about them and the wonderful ministries that they've been part of.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
But I'm just so excited to hear more about their book and for you to get to know them a little bit. And so I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you, Ben and Grace and Michael. Derek and I like to say yes to these things because it means we get to see each other. We don't get to see each other nearly as much as we would like, and so it's basically like Derek and I get to like have coffee and catch up, and you all get to listen. I think that's what these events end up being. So thank you, Ben, for hosting coffee, hosting lunch. Yeah, as mentioned, I'm Anna Woofenden, and Derek and I co-wrote this book a few years back, which really grew out of conversations that we had on our podcast, Food and Faith podcast. So we're just looking forward to sharing some of these ideas with you today. We'll certainly leave plenty of time for Q&A, as we're aware that some may be familiar with this work, others it might be your first time hearing about it. But we like to start off with a bit of continued prayer and liturgy. Throughout this book, there are liturgical pieces that go with each chapter and each invitation. So we'll start off with, are you going to share this, Derek? There we go. I thought so. He's so on it. Appreciate that. And why don't we, since we're on Zoom, Derek, why don't you and I go back and forth on this? And if you're muted, you're welcome to join in wherever you are. Who is and was and is to come. Holy God, holder of our stories,
Come to us now.
God of our ancestors,
Come to us now.
God of this present moment,
Come to us now.
God of the generations that are yet to be,
Come to us now.
usher us into new possibility, inspire us to take a chance on change, kindle in us the hunger for justice, and nourish us with your love.
Amen. So, one of the things that we like to do when we are talking about this book is we want to invite you into thinking about a kitchen. Thinking about a kitchen that has been formative for you, maybe from your childhood, maybe from some other key point in your life. And we wanted to invite you to think a little bit for just a second. Think about who is doing the cooking, what's being cooked, what do you smell, and how do you feel? If you want, you can put your responses to that in the chat. But as we are moving through our discussion of this book, we want you to be kind of located in a space. Let your memory go to what does it feel like for you to be in a kitchen? And I think one of the things that we recognize is that um, that can mean a lot of different things. As we've done this activity a handful of times, I think when we first started doing it, maybe there was this assumption that this would conjure up all of these warm memories for people, but that's not always the case. Sometimes the kitchen can be a place where we have experienced um, lack or deprivation. Sometimes it can be a space where we have experienced a lack of welcome. Sometimes it is a space where we've experienced some harsh family dynamics. But whatever it is that you are feeling and thinking about this kitchen that is in your mind, we welcome all of those things as we do in the book, recognizing that the kitchen is not a static space. It is a space of dynamic change, and where we bring our full selves to that space. So, why this book? And we can both, I think we can both answer this question. One, as Anna said, we used to co-host along with our friend Sam Chamberlain, a podcast called the Food and Faith Podcast. And during the years of hosting and producing that show, we had conversations with all sorts of pastors and farmers and growers of all kind, food justice advocates, people who hosted and led dinner churches. But at some point, we started to have the conversation about the fact that we weren't having a lot of mentions of the kitchen. We weren't talking a lot about cooking. We weren't talking a lot about what happens in the kitchen, the space where ingredients and products get transformed into food. And so we started asking what is it about the kitchen that is prohibitive for these conversations? And so as we started to ponder that question, we just started asking people. And it was important for us to not talk to chefs and food experts. It was important for us to talk to people, everyday people who have to cook for themselves, for their families, and just kind of ask them about their experiences in the kitchen. And we had a wide range of responses. We had a wide range of interactions, and just found out that it was a space that carried a lot of joy, a lot of hurt, a lot of story, a lot of theology, a lot of spirituality. And also, it was just become a place where people interacted with the world in some really tangible ways. And so that's a couple of ways that we've begun to answer this question. Anna, what would you add to that?
Yeah, all of that. And I think just rewinding a little bit, thinking about this gathering and this Creation Care Cafe, one of the things that really inspired us and kept us going through the Food and Faith podcast and then into this book is this deep dedication to creation care and environmental justice. And the reason that we even began with this idea of food and faith is that food is one of those things that if you pull on the thread of food in our interconnected web of life, you get to all the justices, right?
Hmm.
So we talk about food justice, but quickly you're talking about environmental justice, you're talking about gender justice, you're talking about racial justice, you're talking about income inequality, like because we as humans and the animal world, we all have to eat, and how we access and source and grow and cook and consume our food is really central to the experience of being human. And our systems that are complex and have become infiltrated with all the things for good and all the things for evil, right? So our food systems are inherently in them, have opportunity for to be reformed and to become more just and generous, as well as places where incredible healing and justice work are happening around food. Um, so just that kind of bigger picture of, I think sometimes it's like, well, I'm really committed to creation care, and we're going to talk about cooking, and you might be like, why? Like, how does it connect? And so I just want to draw that like really, really direct thread of here's the why food in general. But then particularly as Derek shared, we were just so struck by this idea that we kept skipping the kitchen in these conversations, because a lot of people like to talk about how we grow food, and Derek and I are right amongst those people.
Hmm.
In fact, we get distracted and we ourselves run back out into the garden often, instead of staying in the kitchen. But that there's something really powerful about dwelling in the kitchen. And what we found, particularly as we started writing, I was really struck with early on, once we had all the interviews and we were starting to do research and starting to write, was actually just how hard a place the kitchen is, as Derek mentioned, and how many different inequalities in people's own lives or in our more like historical research show up within that kitchen space. And hand in hand, how making small changes in our kitchen then echo out in large ways. We talk throughout this book about how there's not like, this is not your 16-point plan to check off the box to be like, I will then have a just kitchen at the end of this. In fact, we argued at length and lost the argument about the title of this book because we were more comfortable with it being a just kitchen, with the humility of like, this is one way. Our publisher said that it would sell much better if it was the just kitchen. So we lost that argument, but we stand by the humility of it to say, there's not one way to do this. There's not one way to accomplish this. And that we believe that making these small changes can have a big impact. And one of the examples we use is composting, which Ben knows is like a thing that some of us believe in around here. And how just the small act of paying attention to how much food waste happens in your own kitchen and how much of that you can put into your compost starts to affect how you purchase. It starts to affect how you are using the food or not. It starts to impact maybe where you're purchasing it or how much of it you're purchasing, and maybe how often you're cooking. If you see like, oh, that's on its way out, okay, it's time to make that meal. That's just one example of how we hope that this really is an invitation. It's an invitation to being more sustainable. It's an invitation to having our cooking be part of that. But then it's also an invitation to this bigger work of being connected as human beings and having this be a spiritual act and being something that really connects us both to God and to one another. So those are a few
Yeah.
reasons of why the book And I think Derek's going to share about a little bit from the book, unless you have more to
Yeah.
add to the why, because I think
Well,
we.
I just wanted to build on one thing that you said, because I think it's so important, particularly in this context. One of the I'm facilitating a class on food justice and sustainability for Candler School of Theology, and we're reading Norman Wurzba's book, Food and Faith. And one of the things that Norman Wurzba, as a professor at Duke Divinity School, one of the things that he comes back to is that food connects us to land. And food is one of our most intimate connections to God's creation and our own creatureliness. And I think for those of us who care about what is happening in this planet, on this planet, I think being reminded of our relationships to the more than human world, being reminded of how, whether we like to think about it or not, we are creatures that eat, and are eaten. And that sort of connects us to larger systems of ecology and the ways in which the world is working properly or the ways in which the world is unjust. So with that, one of the things that we were challenged to do throughout the book is to find a singular voice. So throughout this book, Anna and I are kind of harmonizing our thoughts in a way where there's a single voice that is going throughout the book, with a couple of exceptions where each chapter we take a brief second to talk about each of our stories. And so I actually wanted to start our conversation today with reading one of the first stories that appears, and this one is called "Food and Identity." So this is from the first chapter of the book. When you are young, food is food. It would have crossed my mind as a kid to think of "quote unquote" black foods and "quote unquote" white foods. But as I got older and got to peek into more of my suburban white friends' kitchens, it slowly dawned on me that what was happening in the kitchens of my youth was the preparation of black food. Along with that realization came questions about the value of what was happening in my kitchen. Internalized racism asks, if white people aren't doing it, does that make it inferior? Such questions didn't linger because what was coming out of the black kitchens of my younger days was delicious. Though I ceased questioning the merit of the food itself, I was left with the observation that what was happening in our kitchen was a part of who we are, and that had value. Over time, our family's kitchen would become more "quote unquote" white, and maybe a better way of saying that is that our kitchen became more middle class American, more frozen things, more prepackaged things, more instant things. As time in the kitchen became more of a luxury for everyone in the house, convenience took precedence over culture. The casualty of this convenience was the loss of generational memory of what happens in black kitchens. At some point, we lost sight of the kitchen as a place to preserve our culture. This, it seems, happens to a lot of us, regardless of race. Though both my brother and I experimented with our treasured foods, our attempts to make fried chicken like our moms ended in grease fires, plural. We wouldn't have named it as such, but those failures were an attempt at keeping something of our past alive. I'm just now learning what to do with collard greens thanks to the volumes on black cooking, and I insist on growing them every year. My early 20s were a blur of fast food. My late 20s and early 30s, though, were a time of slowly reintroducing myself to the kitchen space. I imagined myself a large event chef using as many pots and pans as possible to create elaborate meals, at least by my standards. That's also when I began to love cooking shows, and let's not forget the grill. I was 30 when I got my first grill. Grilling is an oddly gendered activity, an acceptable way to cook and still be manly. Though I've become suspicious of the gender dynamics that exist around cooking over fire, I still love grilling, and while the grill is outside, I consider it an extension of the kitchen. Over the last decade, my cooking has been paired with an increased love of gardening, which has included my appreciation for African American contributions to the agriculture of this country. My interests now are around what cooking says about the people and cultures represented in the kitchen. I love shows like Chef's Table and Ugly Delicious and anything with the late Anthony Bourdain. Cooking has become for me a way of getting to know people, their history, and their values. This includes my own heritage. Some foods represent struggle and oppression, others represent resilience and ingenuity, still others represent celebration and victory, and can have all of those experiences represented on one plate. And this really kind of gets to the heart of a lot of what we are doing in this book, is kind of connecting food and the experience of cooking to the stories, the history of people, of communities, of the ways that we experience our identity, because food is so deeply linked to who we are, and then fundamentally it links to what we value. Um, and so really one of the things that we are inviting people to do in this book is to break out of the idea of food as just fuel, because we're not machines. We are humans who have a human experience, and we want to invite people to think of food and the rich layers of meaning that come along with the food that we consume.
Thank you, Derek. I never tire of hearing these stories. So along with those layers, we try to start, especially near the beginning of the book, but throughout we weave it in, like I mentioned, with liturgy and with spirituality. And while we're certainly the two authors are coming from a Christian lens, we strive to write this book to be one that will meet anyone who has that interest of the intersectionality of our food and our faith, and particularly in the chapter on kitchen as a place of reflection, talking about how that very act of cooking can be a spiritual practice, and how that act of being in our kitchen with intentionality can be part of our prayer life and can be part of what recenters us back on God and on one another. So I'm going to share a story about called A Few Quiet Moments. And Ben will appreciate that this was written, the little one in this story that was a toddler is now almost 5. So it takes me back a little bit to read this story at this point. For me, touching base with the land and the soil helps me move from a place of production to a place of intention and reflection. It's often the piece that grounds me to enter the kitchen a little more mindfully. Because I'm a pastor with a busy weekend schedule, Mondays are my regular day off, which means a day off for my day job, but a day of full-time parenting as my spouse and I switch off caring for our little one. This past spring, to carve out time for writing this book, we have had the gift of a high school babysitter come over from across the street for a few hours on Monday afternoons so that I could work on the book and then prepare dinner for our family. It's been fascinating to pair dedicated time writing about kitchens with spending time in my own. I've become more acutely aware of my experience of cooking and the complexities around it. From working on a chapter about the importance of taking time and space for cooking, to my own rushing into the kitchen to whip up some eggs and sausage to be ready for dinner at 6 p.m. I often find myself jumping right into the tension between the ideals of the Just Kitchen and the reality of my life, which is a constant invitation for reflection. From late spring through the fall, one of my most grounding spiritual practices comes right before the kitchen, harvesting in the garden. Whether it's with my toddler running around and picking all sorts of things, or a quiet, solitary trip to the backyard garden, this time of paying attention helps me to set the scene for the cooking I am about to do. Fresh peas, new lettuce leaves, and fresh herbs go into the colander, and I marvel at the crispness of each leaf and the potency of the flavors. Even if it's just 5 minutes, it feels like a gift I can give myself to start the cooking process out in the garden. Once I'm inside, I take solitary kitchen time as a special treat. While there's certainly something joyful about the toddler in her kitchen tower and my husband setting the table, when it's just me in the kitchen, I find it a place to reflect. I can let my mind wander in meandering prayer as the feel of my hand holding the knife and the rhythmic movements of chopping create space for my mind to quiet and my heart to settle. Even when the pace picks up and I'm juggling the potatoes boiling in one pan and the fish braising in another, I find there's something about the rhythm that I can get lost in. For me, practices in which I get absorbed and let go of other thoughts and anxieties that often travel with me are essential to my well-being. When cooking holds some intentionality, it gets me out of my head and into my body, half the battle. And though there is a product at the end of it, the process is the practice. And so by the time we sit down at the table to eat, my soul has already been fed. So I invite just that thinking about for you, and maybe the kitchen is a joyful and place for you that you find those quiet moments, or maybe it is laden with other things. But just to think about what those simple practices are that can help us to settle in and to have that space for the still small voice to be speaking. And I think that when we're thinking about bigger creation care, it's easy to either go into despair or to rush forward to solutions. And that part of being people of faith in these processes is to find those places where we can go a little deeper and ground ourselves, and then be able to take action and to take that outward movement from that place of groundedness. Derek, do you want to say anything more about that before we move to the next?
Well, before we move to the next section, I think maybe just to segue us a little bit, one of the other pieces of this book that we are trying to do is to recognize that it's really important for us to when we're talking to folks who are in the church. A lot of us have food pantries. A lot of us have feeding ministries. And I am recognizing more and more that oftentimes there is a disconnect between the feeding ministries of our church and the creation care ministries of our church. And boy, that really needs to go away. That really needs to stop. Because again, food is so essential to the ways that we connect to God's creation. And so thinking about the way, one of the conversations that we want to invite you into as you're thinking about this is not just the ways that we feed ourselves around in our kitchens, around our tables, but thinking about the communal kitchens that so many of our churches occupy, so many of them use, and thinking about the ways that we invite people from the outside to experience the gift of cooking and the results of our cooking. And so just as we are thinking about our spaces, particularly this year, I was drawn into a lot of conversations with people doing food ministries as SNAP benefits were being cut, and really feeling like there was no, because of the emergency of the situation, there was no space to talk about where the food comes from or the quality of the food or things like that. It's just a matter of rushing food to where it's needed most. And I just want to invite us into thinking more deeply and holistically about the ways that we use food to connect to our communities as folks who are in the church. And so hopefully that segues somewhat unawkwardly into the next section.
Well, and I was just gonna just to add to that, one of the things that I became really been just holding it with us in this time of in our country and in the world is it's so easy to get caught in those kind of emergency moments where everything kind of else just goes to the side, which in a way is understandable and is just what you do. But I think it even underscores the importance of looking at the values that are underneath of our systems, and particularly within the church of when we are giving and when we are sharing food, what are the underlying values, and to really examine like why are we doing it? And sometimes I think it's to make ourselves feel better, and sometimes it's to actually help the people that are needing to be helped. So before I read this piece about one of my more personal experiences about collective food justice, I want to share a bit from our dear friend and the Reverend Dr. Heber Brown III, who's the founder of the Black Church Security Network. And he is somebody who's really opened my eyes, and maybe I don't know if Derek can say as well, but his strong voice throughout for 15 going on 15 years now, I guess. It's been a while. We've all been hanging out. Um, in terms of really examining like how are these food systems traps of toxic charity? How are they precipitating or perpetuating systems of privilege and power? So I just want to read a short quote from Dr. Huber Brown around what he would call toxic charity. So he writes, charity does not equal justice. Charity can mask our understanding of the root of the problem. Prolonged engagement with charity can corrode the soul of those in need. It can wear away our sense of human dignity, our somebodyness. The flip side is that when economically affluent, often white-led organizations are constantly in the posture of giving, it can also corrode the soul of the giver, who is always in a position of superiority. Food charity is a sweet siren song. It is not a sustainable track toward the beloved community. I think it's a really important thing for all of us who are doing any kind of food justice work and other work in general is to really be asking some of those questions. And it's not simple. It's not a question that you make sure that your mission statement is on track when you start the program and then it just runs. It really is something that I think that we have to continue to examine because these are parts of ourselves that are very human and normal that we are wanting to feed our own need, whatever our own need is. So to really look at how we continue to be attentive to that together. So I want to share a story about one of my prior lives. The church start in outside of Los Angeles, California. And one of the tagline was feed and be fed. So this idea of mutuality. And so I just want to share a bit about some of our learnings there. The ability for everyone to contribute is a value we see time and time again when it comes to group cooking. Yes, humans share the need to be physically fed, but also many share the need to be able to offer to other people and contribute to the fabric of society. So often when people are struggling and have physical needs that are unmet, toxic givers focus on what they can provide for them, failing to mutually engage and find common invitation for all to care for each other. At the Garden Church, the urban farm and outdoor sanctuary I planted in Los Angeles in 2014, we did a lot of things together. We worked in the garden, planting and weeding and watering and harvesting. We gathered and turned the compost and built new trellises and tied up tomato plants. Sunday gatherings were held in the same space, with the ground beneath our feet and the sky as our roof. And then we ate together. A beautiful swath of humanity gathered around the community meal, some for whom that was their only meal of the day, others who would have otherwise been eating alone in their apartment, and others who found that community gathering was a different kind of nourishment. It was a time of connection and community for all of us. We ate together around picnic tables in a city lot and learned together about growing food that was then cooked and enjoyed. The Garden Church community meal uniquely involved the full circle from growing the food to eating the food to composting the leftovers. And even as the cooking element was primarily done in people's home kitchens, on Fridays, community members often came to harvest whatever was in season and then take it home to cook for the Sunday meal. On any given Sunday, you'd find an 87-year-old grandmother and former nun bringing in large vats of polenta with Swiss chard from the garden laced through it. A fifth-grade boy and his two friends might come in with a huge batch of pesto pasta made with an abundance of basil. One woman who proclaimed herself lonely and didn't want to eat alone brought in a vegetable medley made with the harvest. All of these people circled around and we'd ask each other, "What's on our table today? Tell us about where the food came from." As people shared about the dishes they'd brought, others cheered and expressed appreciation in anticipation for the food they were about to eat. While eating, recipes were shared and connections made. "I never knew how to cook mustard greens," one person said to another. "It makes me so happy to see the food I cooked being enjoyed," said someone else. "It's rather poignant to think that I was part of planting those seeds and tending the crops that we're now eating," another reflected. While the kitchen was not right there, bustling with people cooking together, the act of cooking with food that had been communally grown and then sharing that food together in community completed a circle in which we were all held. And while most of the food was made in people's personal home kitchens, a few makeshift kitchen moments happened right there in the garden or at the picnic table. Often our salads were prepared there. Being in California, there was rarely a time of year without something that could be harvested for a salad, be it tender lettuce greens in the cooler seasons or tomato and basil in the heat. Anyone who showed up could be part of creating this culinary offering, starting with harvesting into a wicker basket and then moving to the outdoor sink and the salad spinner that lived there expressly for this purpose. Often fresh herbs and even edible flowers bedecked these green offerings, and people who didn't have kitchens to cook in found great joy in being able to create a kitchen right there and contribute. The motto of the Garden Church is feed and be fed, with the goal of feeding in body, mind, and spirit. It is embedded right at the center that community is a mutual effort.
I had the privilege a couple of years ago of actually seeing the Garden Church with my own eyes, and was just really blown away by this incredible thing that Anna had created, and that others are now shepherding forward and stewarding in this beautiful way. But it's just one of those spaces that you walk into, and it feels incredibly holy. And so I love to hear that story. I love to hear that story about the Garden Church, and it now I now have a visual to place with it. One of the things that when we were doing the Food and Faith podcast, one of the questions that we would consistently ask is, "What gives you hope?" And we would kind of qualify that question with not sort of the rose-colored optimism hope that says everything's going to be okay, but sort of a gritty hope that gives you the courage to get out of bed in the morning. And I feel like I come back to that question over and over again because I feel like more and more I'm needing to ask this question of myself. What gives me hope? And recognizing that even in the times when I'm not necessarily feeling optimistic, I can still feel hopeful. And I think this is another way. I think that when we think about the climate crisis, the climate changed world that we are living in, I think hope is a really important part of the equation for us. Because why do the work of caring for God's creation if there's not hope involved? If there's not hope for a future that's better for our children and grandchildren, if there's not hope for landscapes that are restored, if there's not hope for ecological cycles that are put back into place, and if there's not sort of the hope for relational change with the ways that we interact with the more than human world. So at the end of the book, we both kind of write a little bit about what gives us hope. And I just want to give the disclaimer that my what gives me hope, pieces of it have aged well, and pieces of it have not aged well. But let me read it, and then I'll come back to that. In late 2019, my oldest daughter became a vegetarian. Months later, two of the other kids followed suit. These sudden seeming changes in diet sparked a lot of conversations in our house about how we should treat animals, what is best for the environment, and what it means to be an ethical eater. My wife and I haven't joined our kids in their meatlessness, nor has our youngest son, but we have started eating less meat and now pursue better raised and animal honoring meat. Our cooking has changed because of our kids' convictions. Our children are thinking about the ways they can make the world a better place. That more than anything gives me hope. I am very aware of how far my real life is from my ideals on so many fronts, but especially in the kitchen. The truth of my kitchen is that there are fruit flies hovering around the tomatoes from my garden. There's an unused head of lettuce slowly rotting in the crisper, and family-sized containers of items from big box stores make it hard to move around. The recycling bin is full of pizza boxes. The garbage has half of a kid's dinner that didn't make it into the compost despite my nagging. So, what qualifies me to write about A Just Kitchen? It's been a surprising companion on this journey, a softer, quieter companion. I don't know if it is a new companion or one whose voice has been strengthened by the process of writing. It is a voice of attentiveness. It draws my attention to the people I am cooking for just as much as to the act of cooking. It occasionally snaps me out of my rush to get things to the table to appreciate the sound of boiling water, the smell of fresh herbs, and the feel of a knife against a cutting board. It is a voice that draws my attention away from the fact that I didn't grow the lettuce myself and takes a second to pray for the hands that did. It is a voice that reminds me that beef is a cow, pork is a pig, and poultry is a chicken, and that all of those beings should be honored as they give their lives for ours. It is a reminder that while billionaires own those stores that I'm ashamed to have shopped in, the people working there and shopping there are doing what they can to put food on their own tables, and there is dignity in that. It is a recognition that I am connected to the whole of creation in messy, complicated, beautiful, and surprising ways. Early in this process, I described the book in progress to an acquaintance. Actually, that acquaintance was my therapist. Her eyes lit up as I shared that I hoped to break us out of seeing cooking as a chore. Right, she responded. It's not a chore, it's a ritual. I agreed. And while rituals can be reduced to merely structural repetition, my hope is that we can see cooking as a ritual that honors the continuity of life. One thing dies that another might live. We are creatures participating in the acts of creation, and yet we are the only creatures that cook. The lives that are preserved through cooking are ones with the opportunities to speak peace into the world, call out injustice, and make right what is wrong in our broken systems until they too become food for the life that will come after them. My kids are a part of the life that comes after me. With every meal I make them, I hope I am nurturing people who will speak truth to power. I hope I am fueling bodies that will stand up for the vulnerable. I hope that when they see me in the kitchen, they are invited into the delight that I feel in getting the opportunity to love them in such a tangible way. I hope they see that my wife and I have tried our best to create a space of welcome and hospitality where all are afforded their due dignity. And I hope they will continue to be people who are uncomfortable with the world as it is and who will do the small incremental things that make it better. So the things that haven't aged well. None of my kids are vegetarian anymore. But they are still asking these questions, and we are still having these wonderful conversations about where food comes from, what it means to be a responsible person living in this world, and what it means to have a more just and righteous way of living in this world. But it's also, and one of the things that is kind of consistent throughout this book is that, with one exception, there's a lot of grace given in this book. There's a lot. It's not a lot of you should do this, you should do that. It's a lot of grace giving, because none of us are going to do this perfectly. We are set up to fail by the systems that are around us, and so none of us can do this perfectly. Now, the one place where we get a little bit judgy is about compost. We really think that everyone should compost. But other than that, we really do hope that one of the things that makes kitchens just kitchens is that they're grace filled, recognizing that cooking is a very personal, private, and intimate thing, yet it also connects us to the larger world in some really significant and tangible ways. And so that is an important tension for all of us to hold. So as we're wrapping up, and I think I'm going to stop sharing now. I think want to invite you all as you're thinking, what gives you hope? I think whether or not you can maybe think of something that is going on in your world, something that's going on in your church, something that's going on in your life. But maybe just in the chat for a second, name some things that are giving you hope. And as we do that, I think we can also start to think about how we begin to live out some of those hopes and pass those hopes down to the people who will come after us.
Something that we find when we ask this question is that it's easy to kind of go to the far off, easy, fluffy hopes. I think you use the word gritty, Derek. But it's really encouraging to think about what are your gritty hopes? What are your actual like hopes that are going to be put into action, hopes that are going to be, or the thing that's giving you hope because somebody keeps showing up. It's that kind of like persistent faith kind of hope.
So I wanted to make sure that we left some time for questions, and so I think now would be a good time to do that, and then we can close with one of the other liturgies. And I should Anna was very um, uh, humble, as she often is, that a lot of these liturgies that are in this book are ones that she wrote herself. And they are beautiful, and I use them in a lot of contexts, not just when I am talking about the Just Kitchen. So, um, but we will have some time for conversation and questions, and then we will come back to one of those liturgies. I see a hand up. Kim?
I think
You're
you're
muted.
muted.
You're muted. Yeah.
Think I'd know by now. Um, I've loved this whole conversation, and one of the several things I do is I write a blog for our conference on Go Green, Save Money, Save the Earth. And of course, I've written a blog on composting, and it is particularly challenging for inner city people. And I wondered
Mm.
what solutions you have for that group who would like to compost, but it's very hard.
Yeah.
Love
And
that question.
I'm sure you have some thoughts on this. Because this was a blinder for me that I didn't realize that I had. I was
Mm.
speaking at a church in New York City and talking about the virtues of composting, and everyone was kind of looking at me blank faced, like, "Yeah, we can't do that." There's a couple things. One, I think it's really important that we put pressure on our cities and municipalities to have composting spaces and composting services in those kind of densely populated metropolitan areas. I think that's a place for petitions. That's a place for some kind of good productive lobbying to get compost happening in those urban spaces. I think there's also in a lot of urban spaces and more in urban spaces, there are collectives of folks who will come by and collect compost and take them to farms, they'll collect food scraps and they'll take them to farms, they'll take them to urban gardens and things like that. So I would just really encourage people to get educated on the local composting initiatives, and then lobby and figure out like what can we get started in our own municipalities. Anna, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so those ones, and then to two other ideas. One is that there are actually a fair number of community gardens especially in like larger cities, who are looking for compost scraps. So just to build on that really specifically, like find out where other people are composting, but it also might be you're in your local community garden. I think can be
Mhm.
a piece. And then just two very practical things. I've spent some time living in places where I don't have my own compost heap, and I'm not the pastor of a garden church that has compost. Um, you can put your compost in the freezer. Now, this might sound like really basic, but like this is a kind of a game changer if you can't get to the place where you're delivering your compost on a regular basis. So I lived in an apartment. It was a smaller city. There was like in the end, I ended up taking my compost to somebody's farm like every couple weeks, and I would just keep it in a Ziploc in the freezer, and then it wouldn't get stinky. And you just, so I think that's like a very practical way. They're also, I mean, they cost a little bit of money, and Derek could speak more about how well they work, but there are like food mills and composting like um, machines now that are made for small apartments, and they get it down to basically being like a drier kind of like soil, which you then could take somewhere. Um, I don't know, Derek, if you want to say whether you would recommend now or not. Like, I know you're a few years in, but like if you lived in the middle of a city with no access to compost.
Yeah, so I have a device that's called a Lomi. It is a little at-home
Yep.
composter. And I love it. I absolutely love it. And we sometimes will take the after we run the Lomi and put it, particularly in the summer, we'll put it like right on our flowers or right in our flower beds. And it things seem to bloom a little faster after we do that. I would say that if you're in an apartment, because it is burning things, because it is burning food waste, it does have a smell. And so if you're in a confined space, an apartment, like you will have to deal with a little bit of a smell of like things that are being burned. But it's not, I don't find it to be overwhelming. And I find it to be a pretty good quality compost too. So that is an option, and there are more and more of those that are happening. There's one called the Mill, Lomi, Lomi, but it's definitely based off of the word loam. Um, and I saw there's a couple others that are hitting the market. Um, so I do think it's a good option. But there are, yeah, I think there's just a lot of ways that we can plug into building larger community infrastructure for composting.
And I will say, and Ben will know I haven't quite managed this in my local context, but I think it's a great way to get people to come to church is if the church actually is the place, the compost drop-off place. We had people at the Garden Church who would come to worship every week because their compost was starting to smell. So if you have a church that has land, be that and by land I mean like, I don't know, 10 square feet or something. Um, Particularly in an urban setting where people might not be able to have their own compost, become the compost spot. And not only are you helping the earth, but people will show up at your church on a regular basis because their compost will start to stink. I think we probably have time for at least one, maybe a couple more questions. Or comments, objections. Michael?
So let me ask, do you have any experience with worm farms? I'm so excited. I've got a worm farm. I've had it for about a year now, maybe a year and a half. I have 3 tiers. I don't know how many thousands of little, red wigglers going there. And they take I don't give them any protein, but we don't have bones or we just don't need a lot of meat. But everything else goes right in there and they love it, especially coffee grounds. Oh man.
Yeah, I also have a worm bin, um, and I love it. And again, like it's pure gold straight into your garden. I mean, it's like one of the best things that you can do. Now, and in fact, this is completely random. I live in Baltimore County. You're only allowed in my county. You're only allowed to compost if you are vermicomposting, which I think is kind of ridiculous. But I vermicompost, so it doesn't it doesn't affect me at all. But it's such a like. Here's the other piece for us as church folk. Um, Compost is such a beautiful spiritual metaphor, of thinking about the things that get thrown away and how they get turned into new life. I mean, that's what our faith is built on. So I think just for the metaphors, just for the preaching examples alone, those of you who are parts of churches need to get compost on the program. Any
Are there
last questions
any non-compost related? They look at
or
us.
additional compost related
Or
questions?
additional,
I'm
we could
we
actually
will
talk
talk
about
about
compost all day.
compost all day long.
All day. I guess that's our next book, right, Derek? We just actually need to
I,
write a book
I,
about
we
safe
probably just do need to
compost.
write a book about compost.
Okay,
I'm on board for that.
deal.
Well, I just want to thank you all so much for taking the time to be here. Derek and Anna, it's wonderful to meet you and to hear about this exciting book. And I'm a third of the way in myself, so I can't wait to finish it. But I would just ask, maybe could we, in light of the time, move to our closing litany, and then we'll ask Pastor Michael to close us in prayer?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And I dropped
So
the
we're
link
right.
for your book is in the chat.
You want me to go, Derek, or you on it?
Yep, go for it.
Okay. God's kitchen. You are welcome in God's kitchen just because we belong to God and we belong to one another. We're welcome in God's kitchen on good days and bad, when we're grieving, when we're celebrating, when we're craving community, and when we want to be alone. We are welcome in God's kitchen to create and to be fed, to connect and to celebrate, to heal and to be nurtured, and be transformed into God's beloved community kitchen. Amen.
And if we could be in the spirit of prayer, creator of heaven and earth, we thank you for this time of shared learning, holy conversation, and renewed commitment. As we leave this space, send us out as faithful stewards of your good creation. Open our eyes to the beauty around us. Strengthen our resolve to protect what you have made, and guide our daily choices toward justice, sustainability, and love. May the seeds planted here bear fruit in our lives and in the life of the world. Amen.
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 Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us. It's a joy.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
I have a copy of your book on order and I can't wait.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoy it.
Gonna
Hope you enjoy it.
happen.